Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Cabrera Holtz. I'm the Senior Campaigns Manager at World Animal Protection. I'm a lawyer and I work on laws that ban the sale of animals in pet stores, including parrots, among other wildlife protection issues. So I'm moderating this panel with Nicole, but before we get into introductions, I'm going to provide some context for the panel. In that obviously there are so many ways that laws and regulations can protect parrots, from environmental protection laws that conserve their habitat and protect them from poaching, to climate laws that make sure parrots and humans and all beings have a safe place to live. But there are also laws that we can pass to protect parrots living in captivity, or rather prevent more parrots from ending up in captivity. And one of the most, for me, the most exciting developments in animal protection in the United States has been the rise of retail sales bans. So laws that prohibit the sale of parrots or other animals from being sold in pet stores. Um, Birds are purchased, we know, in a variety of ways, online, directly from a breeder, acquired from friends. But we know from industry research that the number one way that people acquire birds in the United States today, and I'm guessing in many other global north countries, is at a pet store. So 56% of birds in the US are purchased at a store. And then when you add in sources like a friend or they were a gift, it's even higher, because in many of those cases, the original purchaser acquired the parrot at a store. So then we're talking 75%, 80%. Further echoing what one speaker said in the social media panel, when we buy birds, when we see people buying birds, it perpetuates the myth that that's okay, that it's okay for birds to be in a cage, that it's okay to walk into a big box pet store and see lots and lots of parrots next to dog leashes. Um, so these new laws are really exciting, one for the parrots who are currently being farmed in horrific conditions, and they also offer a lot of potential to change the paradigm. So I wanted to give people a brief overview of current bans. There are pending bans, a parrot sales ban in Massachusetts, a bird retail sales ban in New York State, and New York City. And then we have something I've been calling an expanded retail sales ban, which means that would ban the retail sale of all animals, from guinea pigs to bearded dragons to fishes. There's one being considered in Lemon Grove, California. And I believe I saw in the chat and some people mentioning we have two recent victories as of this month. West Hollywood, California passed the first expanded retail sales ban in the state, and it's the most expansive in the country, the first law that includes hermit crabs. And then Easton, Pennsylvania, also passed an expanded retail sales ban, thanks to wonderful local grassroots groups. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to provide some background before we get started. And now I'm going to pass it to Nicole to introduce herself and the other panelists.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Martinez. I work with foster parrots, an avian rescue that also serves as a sanctuary in Rhode Island. This year, we worked with state representatives and senators to introduce a bill that would ban the sale of parrots at pet stores. So I'm excited to share with you what my experience was like and what I learned about state legislation. And then if I could have Steph introduce herself.
Hi, my name's Steph Harris. I'm a senior legislative affairs manager for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. I am a lobbyist who works primarily at the state level and across all of the New England states and a few others. And I have colleagues at my organization who cover our other states and work at the federal level. I have had experience working on legislative and political campaigns across animal issues, companion animals, wild animals, farmed animals, animals used in research, sort of the whole gamut. And Animal Legal Defense Fund is a national animal protection organization that was funded back in the 1970s by a group of lawyers who were interested in shaping the then emerging field of animal law.
Thank you. Then if Laura would be next to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Laura Keisell. I'm the founder and director of both Save Arlington Wildlife and Save Massachusetts Wildlife. We mainly started to advocate against rodenticides in Massachusetts. We were the first town to ban second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, which were killing a lot of our birds of prey here in Arlington on our public properties, and to petition the state. Last year, I worked, Save Arlington Wildlife introduced the first very comprehensive pet sale ban. It was the second one after the city of Cambridge, and it was the first one to include fish, and it did include birds. And that passed by a majority vote in our town. So I'll be talking a little bit about my experiences with that today.
Great. And lastly, if Judie would introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Judie Mancuso, and I'm the one in my group responsible for the bans. Started with West Hollywood back in '08, '09, and then I worked with the city of LA to do it there, and then brought it to the state of California in 2017. And we got that done. And one of the main things that's so important about legislation is that it gets copied, and then you're saving animals' lives, exponentially. So I started my group in 2007. And we have done now over 70 sponsored bills. We've gotten 28 signed into law. And I most recently wrote a book that tells all about my experience with that retail ban, plus all the others. It's called Because They Need Us, My Political Fight to Save Animals. So I'll be talking more about that in just a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. I just wanted to clarify something too, because I realized some of the audience might be confused. When we say retail bans, there's actually many, many retail bans that just apply to dogs and cats and rabbits. But we're here talking today about expanding those to parrots. I'll also say, Nicole, I realized looking at my slide, I left out Rhode Island, which you've now already mentioned. I can't believe I did that, since that was
No, that's
that
okay.
had the most, the state bill that had the most traction this year, and of course the home of foster parrots. So because of that, I will start with you, Nicole. If you could tell us more about the Rhode Island bill, how involved you were. Well, first, yeah, tell us exactly what it was and how involved you were and how it came about.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And the good news is we're going to try again next year as well. So it wasn't successful this year, but we already have everything set up to try again next year. So just start with that little bit. But basically it came about because, being at foster parents, I see the need for something to change. We need better welfare laws for parrots. And so I decided to reach out to my state representative, Megan Cotter. And so I just detailed, the absolute crisis that's going on with parrots in captivity, how pet stores are pushing for far more parrots that could ever be responsibly placed. So just and statistics. I used shelter statistics to really show that this was a problem. It wasn't a feel fact where I was going out and saying, "Hey, this is what I would like." So I got a great response from her, and she said she would sponsor the bill. And I was all new to that, so that there was learning a lot, on the way. And so she sponsored it. It was up for a hearing in February, and then that was followed by a Senate bill that had a hearing as well. And yeah, it was just a really good experience, and that everyone was very receptive. And then I had the help of foster parents with staff and volunteers there, so it really was a group effort. And yeah, that's about it. And that it would ban, yeah, exactly. I didn't actually go over it. So the specifics of it was that it would just ban the sale of parrots at pet stores. So that would be the big box stores or smaller stores as well. And that it would put limitations on how they would be sold outside of stores is too. Like you couldn't just simply sell them in parking lots, even if you were given permission from owners. Just really trying to think of all the different ways that there could be loopholes to try to make sure that is effective. So, yes.
Great. Laura, could you tell us about your work in Arlington? and give us context, because I know also we have people from all over the world, and that is just a small city.
Yeah, so it's technically a town though. It's pretty large for a town. It's large enough to be a city. It's about 50,000 people. So I live in Arlington, Massachusetts. It's in the Boston metro area. We actually border the city of Cambridge, which houses Harvard, so a very big city. In 2018, the city of Cambridge had passed a retail sale ban on all animals except fish in their city borders. So that included birds and parrots. And they did actually have a big pet store presence in the city of Cambridge. There's a very large PetSmart. Actually, it's right near the border of Arlington. And they did have to go through a phase out period for those animals. They do partner with rescue. So when it says a retail sale ban, that is on selling animals for profit. But the pet stores can partner with rescues to help facilitate adoptions for an adoption fee. You might have seen this happens a lot with cats. Like a lot of cat rescues will work with a PetSmart or a Petco to use some of their windows to have the cats featured in. They get more eyeballs, get more adoptions that way. And usually there's a volunteer from the volunteer organization. So it's not the pet store taking care of those animals. Primarily, it's like the adoption agency is coming in every day and spending time with those cats and cleaning up. So they get a lot more individual attention. But now this shifts it for other animals as well. So occasionally I do see birds at the PetSmart in Cambridge that are either the ACO found them or a rescue has some extra, it's usually budgies, and that helps get them adopted pretty quickly. And again, the adoption agency works with them. So I was inspired by that last year to do our own pet sale ban. And I wanted to, like Cambridge, be very comprehensive because while 16 municipalities in Massachusetts have had pet sale bans on dogs, cats, and rabbits, and another handful maybe also on guinea pigs. Almost none other than Cambridge and Brookline have included birds, and other than Cambridge included anything other than mammals and birds. So I wanted to do as much as I felt I could fit in. Luckily, at the time, Arlington, we had a Petco, but it wasn't selling animals, but we were trying to make sure that didn't become the case. Because our argument was like, as this market shrinks, with cities like Cambridge that did have pet sales in their retail stores, we didn't want it to come into our town, and it helps establish a precedent so places that do have pet stores can also ban, because every town or city that passes this ban makes it more likely others will, including those that have active pet stores. So even if you live in a town or city in the United States that doesn't have a pet store that's selling these animals, it still, I think, is worth trying to, if you think that you have a good shot, trying to pass these bans. So I brought it last year. It covered mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians, and it was actually our select board that was moved enough to also add fish in. And that was really inspiring and heartening that they did that. And luckily, because it was the select board that added fish, I think it gave more incentive when it came up for a town meeting vote that it passed. So in New England, if you live in a city, you have a city council vote. Usually it's 5 to 10 or 12 city councilors. But if you live in a town in Massachusetts or several New England states, after the select board gets their preliminary vote, it goes to town meeting. And depending on how large your town is, like here in Arlington, we have 282 town meeting members that vote on things. So it's in theory a much more democratic process because you have so many representatives. But sometimes it can be challenging because you have so many people to appeal to. So it's a little different if you do it in a city, and I'm glad to talk about that and any of the challenges we faced. But I think having a unanimous select board vote went a long way for the town meeting to pass it with a landslide.
Nicole and Laura, could you both talk about the opposition that you faced? Maybe starting with Nicole, since I know you had a hearing that had a lot of people come out and that a lot of things happen. And if you could just describe the opposition and how you dealt with that, and then we'll go to Laura.
Sure. The Pet Advocacy Network was there. They argued that pet stores And you'll hear this argument again and again that pet stores, they offer the best care and that they're already heavily regulated and there's no room for improvement. They're already doing everything that they can feasibly do. I mean, of course, that's misleading because pet stores are not subject to inspections. The Animal Welfare Act does not include pet stores. It only includes breeders and only certain breeder sites. And then the other thing was to kind of minimize the the issues smaller parrots experience with captivity. So the idea was, oh, I hope you don't mean to include parakeets and conures. These birds, they do well in captivity, completely overlooking the various issues they experience. So I'd say between that and then also saying by taking the option away from purchasing a parrot at a pet store, you're going to increase scams that people are going to be turning to the black market more, which is ridiculous considering even with the pet store ban, there'll still be breeders, and so we was really just working against that, the idea, this image that this pet store is doing so much already. It's a shame because we've reached out multiple times to try to enforce better care, to change protocols, and nothing ever changes. That's a really frustrating part about it. Then you'll hear them say, "Oh, well, all you have to do is come meet us halfway." No, that's not what happened. So at the first hearing, that was kind of what was indicated. Well, why don't you work on having avian care specialists come in? It's not going to happen. So that's why the ban is so important. We need to make a stand and say that this type of behavior is not acceptable. It's not good to treat parrots like they're products and only think about profits. So, but those are the main arguments that I saw. And yeah, so I'll hand it over to Laura now.
So at the 11th hour, a town meeting member tried to filed an amendment. So usually before a town meeting hears a warrant, people could try to do amendments to change the language. So at the 11th hour, a town meeting member did put in a warrant amendment to basically water down the bill and only make it ban the sale of mammals at pet stores, but not any other animals, including birds. Do you want me to talk about a little how we oppose that, or do you want to wait?
No, sure. Please get
Okay.
into it, and then we'll shift.
So we had to scramble because this was like only a couple of nights before the vote, and suddenly this person put forth this amendment. It wasn't on birds, but they had someone who worked in the aquatics industry who had this argument for like fish that, you're going to put people out of business in other countries that really, like poor villagers who are taking these fish. So people were also applying that argument to other animals as well, even though it wasn't focused on that. We had a lot of help from the MSPCA, and I do believe Steph's organization was partnered with them on that. So Animal Defense League and the Boston Animal Rescue League also signed off on everything MSPCA submitted. So they wrote like sort of a one-pager against all these arguments and had to send it to town meeting members. Again, these are 282 people, so they had to do it like throughout the night in smaller doses so that it didn't get in their spam folders. But it was also really helpful that I had letters on hand that I had submitted for the select board hearing. Foster Parrots wrote a really impassioned and well-informed letter with all their stats of how many animals they get relinquished or surrender requests they're getting from Massachusetts that are coming from pet stores initially, including the small birds like the budgies and the cockatiels, and really listing all the health issues. I really think that helped undercut the argument for birds. I also think, we talked a lot about, we used a lot of facts because I think not just saying it's inhumane, but being able to have certain facts on hand to say like, well, 75 to 90% of these birds die before point of purchase, or 70 to 80% die within the first year or two. I grew up, I had several budgies as a child, so I was able to have some personal anecdotes where I said, None of the budgies I had growing up lived past a couple of years. I didn't even know until I got to high school that these animals could live for over a decade. And, actually, the reason I'm so passionate about this is because I feel like I'm doing reparations for what my family did, to placate me as a child when I wanted a bird. So having that argument, and the conservation argument, because I do think sometimes people don't always relate to the animal welfare argument, like especially if they haven't had a bird in their life, they're not quite seeing it in the same way as a dog or a cat. But if you can say these animals are going extinct in the wild, they're going endangered in their native areas, especially at least a town like Arlington that really prides itself on caring about climate change and caring about endangered species. It might be a little different if you're in a more conservative town. But appealing to that argument, I think, won people over even when they didn't care as much about the animal welfare argument, like, wow, animals are going endangered. But it's also affecting us here in Massachusetts because when those people can't keep those animals as pets, if they can't find a place to surrender it, what do? They release them into the wild, and now they're encroaching on our native birds and they're competing with our native birds, and we love our natives here in Arlington, Massachusetts, and they're competing with their resources. So we're also contributing to the issue that way. And so I think using those statistics and also talking about the fact that, especially for the large chain stores, these animals are coming from mills because people know what puppy mills are and kitten mills, but a lot of times they don't realize what parrot mills are or multi-species mills. But when they hear that, that word has a lot of stigma. And then I think it's a light bulb moment for people because they don't realize those birds are coming from mills that they're seeing in pet stores and they know that word.
Thanks, Laura and Nicole. So kind of shifting from local advocates, grassroots advocates, I want to turn to Steph, who is a seasoned lobbyist and has worked in multiple states. Like, what is your advice for people new to legislative advocacy and people who don't know much?
Sure. So I guess in short, my advice is to focus on building relationships and getting background information. And this, of course, will look different in every jurisdiction you're in. But what I mean by background information can be things like watching relevant webinars from advocacy organizations, national organizations, and state organizations. They'll often have somewhat different perspectives and have more or less jurisdiction-specific information. And they may have webinars that are on how to pass things federally at the state level versus locally. They might focus in on one of those. And so look for that relevant background information. You want to learn about the specific process in your jurisdiction. So as Laura mentioned, in Massachusetts, if you're a town versus a city, that process can look different. And so if you're passing something at the town, in a city, or at the state level, all of those processes look different, and they look different from state to state. And so you want to learn about that process specifically. So just an example of that is, at the state level, a lot of states have a legislative session that runs approximately January to June. But some states, like the one that Laura and I both work in, have it for 2 years straight with virtually no breaks. So there's a bunch of states that have a 2-year session: Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California. And what things look like in the first year of the session versus the second year of session can be really different from one to the next and from state to state. So you might only have one introduction period every 2 years for new bill language, for example. So you really want to learn what that process is for you specifically, because it's not something that can always be directly replicated from one place to the next. And you want to learn about what has worked on similar campaigns in that jurisdiction specifically. You can take advice from other jurisdictions, but what is persuadable to the folks where you're looking to work specifically? So some elected officials could be more persuaded by their constituents, the people who are directly voting for them, people in their district. Others might be somewhat more persuaded by their own colleagues. So who else on city council do they tend to listen to, or who else in the state legislature? Is hearing about issues in the media something that is particularly impactful on the legislators that you're trying to persuade specifically? Or are there certain stakeholders or certain constituencies that they're persuaded by? So, do they have existing connections, or do they tend to work on issues that are related to other groups? So, say veterinarians or business owners or schools and students. Like, um, how can you use their um, connections and interests to pull them in on the issue that you want them to be engaged on specifically? And how does this issue relate to this jurisdiction specifically? So, like, can you identify stories from advocates, from consumers, from veterinarians, from pet stores that choose not to do this in your jurisdiction specifically, so if you're working at the city or the state level, and then also depending on who the legislator is that you're, or a group of legislators that you're trying to target, who is in their district specifically. So you want to collect that kind of information. And so that's all sort of some examples of what that background information could look like. And then in terms of relationship building, it's how do you develop a personal connection with your legislators? And so, like, the easiest place to start is to use one of those legislator lookup tools. So, who are your elected officials personally at the state level and at the local level? And do they host office hours? Is there some way that you can meet with them in person, in district? Do they have an in-district office, or do they just have an office in the state legislature or what have you? How can you connect with them in person? It tends to be the most effective, but I realize sometimes that requires too much travel or logistics. And so alternatively, can you do something via Zoom or some sort of video platform? And then if you can't manage that, something on the phone. And if you can't manage that, something via email. But ideally, you're really building those connections in person as much as possible. And if that's intimidating, bring a buddy with you. Bring somebody who maybe is in the same position as you, or maybe has more experience. Maybe you can seek someone as sort of a mentor, even if they don't have the same issue specific expertise that maybe you're bringing to the table. And one of the things to think about in this relationship building process is that in a lot of jurisdictions, there is a tremendous amount of value in building relationships with the elected official as well as their staff. It's not necessarily any sort of slight if they ask you to meet with their constituent services director or legislative director. Staff can have a lot of influence in these offices. And so building those relationships with electeds and with their staff is very valuable. And build relationships with coalition partners. So potentially that's folks and orgs that are on this presentation right now, but go even beyond that. Who are your related stakeholders? And then even further afield, who can you wrangle in, maybe not to be a really active partner, but maybe someone who signs on in support of something, lends their name, lends their credibility in a more passive way. And who are those folks at the national, state, and at the local level? And are they animal or are they non-animal? Are they business owners? Are they environmental or conservation folks? Are there law enforcement folks? Are religious officials someone that's influential in your communities? Really look outside the box sometimes. And then this is a little bit relationship building and a little bit background info, but who is your opposition likely to be? Do you know what to expect from them? Are they folks that you have a connection with personally? If there's opposition that you expect on the ground in your community, can you identify who those people or organizations will be? And does it make sense to potentially initiate conversations with them to see if you can pursue some amount of common ground? Is there a version of compromise or is there not? And can you make sure that you've prepared some responsive talking points to the things that you anticipate that they'll bring up, which is different from proactively making their arguments for them, but be ready if the opposition talking points are out there with like, what can you say to counteract those points? And to figure out what that can look like, you can look for what has happened on similar campaigns in other jurisdictions, and reach out to folks that have experience on these issues. So those are sort of a lot of different things. There's so much more that goes into it, but sort of the two pillars, if I had to put them in buckets, would be background information and building relationships and making sure that those things are really jurisdiction specific.
Thanks, Steph. Turning to our other like state advocate or seasoned advocate, Judie, I would love to hear about, well, first, so California's ban on the retail sale of dogs, cats, and rabbits went into effect in 2019. So I'd love for you to talk about maybe not necessarily just the bill, but like what are your lessons learned from the journey California's gone on? What can we apply to parrots? Why weren't parrots included, perhaps? Yeah, just any of your thoughts on that?
Thank you. Well, originally, when I brought the bill, so I kind of want to, let me just take one step back. I started at the local level because I knew that if we could at least show that Californians were for these bans and disrupting the millers, puppy millers and breeders. So doing it at a local level, but at the local and the state level, what I proposed was including birds and so-called pocket pets. So it was dogs, cats, rabbits. I wanted to capture everything. And because we're talking the years 2006, 07, 08, when we were doing the local jurisdictions, people were not ready for that. I mean, they didn't even know about puppy mills completely. They didn't understand why you spay and neuter. So we had this whole education that needed to be done on pet overpopulation, too many animals, not enough homes, the conditions, where they come from, et cetera, et cetera. So we got the local stuff done. And then, I moved to the state of California. California is now the fourth largest economy in the world. We're 40 million people. So what happens here in California definitely makes a huge difference worldwide. And then, like I said, gets copied across the United States. And so when I first met with Assembly Member Patrick O'Donnell, who carried the bill for me, and, I pitched him the idea, I let him know that we had done it in other jurisdictions, and I included all the animals. And he was like, nah, the constituents aren't ready for that. And we did polling. That's the other thing. Polling costs a lot of money. For the big groups, it's easier because they have a lot of money. But for small groups like mine, it's anywhere from $7,000 to $15,000. But I will tell you that you get a big bang for your buck with polling because it proves to these legislators that they have coverage, that people want this, right? So anyhow, the way Patrick looked at it, Assemblymember O'Donnell, was, what the most animals coming into our shelters were dogs, cats, and rabbits, dogs and cats by far. And that's what was costing the taxpayers all the money to bring these animals in, house them, rehome them, euthanize them, the whole gambit, right? So I was happy just finding an author that would carry this bill because I knew how much opposition it would have. And honestly, even knowing how much it would have, it had even way more, when we were walking to one of the committee hearings one day, we were walking down the hall and Patrick looked at me and went, "What did you get me into?" So lessons learned, you know, people will try to skirt laws. You have to get one law in place, right? And be able to enforce it, watch it, see how it works, and then the unscrupulous will find other ways to go around things, right? So then you may have to change your law. You may have to put other laws in place. And that was the next step was, we disrupted the biggest supply chain of the puppy mills and the cat millers and the rabbit millers. But then they went into being brokers and being that middle person. And I could go into all the fraud that is out there on how these folks act like, oh, we raise these animals in our backyard. Oh, they're in our home. Oh, we love them so much. We're a hobby breeder, this, that, and the other. And they're coming from the darkest, most horrible places, as I know where the parrots come from. So that answers one of your questions, and I have a list of answers for your other ones. So I'll let you move on, Liz, so I can answer some of the other ones.
Well, that sort of sparked something for me, Judy. You're saying that there are lots of dogs and cats coming into shelters. So that makes me think like it's a crisis, right? We've all heard of like overpopulation crisis for dogs and cats. Here we're here today to talk about the parrot crisis, but most people outside of this room don't know there's a parrot
That's right.
crisis or don't believe it. So I thought maybe I
That's
could
right.
turn you to Nicole to talk about how did you get that point across? And I assume you did it effectively because you got a bill introduced. Like, so obviously people need to believe there's a crisis, right? And so what did you do to make that happen?
Well, what I did was describe the situation. I explained an average day at the sanctuary to Megan Cotter, and then I, as I said before, pulled some of the statistics and said if you keep this trend, at the time I wasn't sure what it was going to be, but if we continue this way, it's only going to get worse, and we can estimate it will be this way. Um, and I said the real hardship is that pet stores are not preparing owners. I mean, the only thing that is required is that you can afford them. They don't screen like an adoption center would. And so just explaining that and the other part, after it did fail the first time around, because we do have a short legislative session comparatively, I went and I spoke to some of the co-sponsors just to get an idea of how they felt. And I think that one-on-one was incredibly helpful. To reiterate why it's important and that you cannot be dismissive because, oh, these are animals you don't have, or you don't have personal experience with, or they're smaller, like a parakeet. So just driving those points across and just really explaining to people how these are social and intelligent animals. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people at work, just randomly discussing things and, oh, birds actually want to interact. They don't want to sit in a cage all day. These are things that we have to work against. So I found that to be most effective, just sitting down and going over why it is important that these animals are very much capable of being depressed and suffering. So I think also explaining when I that there aren't enough shelters geared for parrots or other birds, that it is very much underrepresented. So yeah, all of those things. I think th those were helpful points, and that was it.
To to follow up on Nicole, I think an interesting sort of case study is as we all know, there's a number of states that have retail sales bans that are narrowly focused on a certain subset of animals. And then there's municipalities that generally, all across the country, that generally focus on those same animals, dogs and cats, sometimes also rabbits. And I think an interesting case study is Boston, which originally passed a local law that applied to dogs, cats, and rabbits. At the time, rabbits were still a little bit trickier to get included than dogs and cats, which has changed a bit now. Um, but Boston, years later, circled back. This is now just, I think it was in 2023, but if anyone remembers the exact date, feel free to check me. Everything blends together eventually. Updated their law to incorporate guinea pigs. And that was because there was so much evidence that the MSPCA, which has an animal shelter in Boston, in the city, as does the Animal Rescue League of Boston, they both had data that they could demonstrate to the council that this was a crisis in Boston specifically. There was a guinea pig overpopulation crisis, and being able to present that to the council was persuasive enough that they were willing to sort of upgrade the existing pet store law to incorporate an additional type of animal. And I think that approach is an interesting one to think about when you're looking to protect a category of animals that isn't currently typically included in these laws.
It helps, that years pass and, originally it was, the sky is falling. They called it the Pet Extinction Act. Oh my gosh, nobody's going to be able to get an animal, and we said, look, there's already the surplus of animals. And we're just trying to get the ones home instead of killing them. So, the time has come, obviously, if there are jurisdictions passing hamsters and birds, and what WeHo just did is significant. So we couldn't have gotten it done in 2017. We couldn't have gotten it done in 2008. Can we get it done today? The answer is yes, they did in WeHo, and there's others doing it. So, but you have to prove there is a problem. And, like Steph said, like Nicole said, you better have receipts because the one thing that the legislature hates is, oh, these animal activists, they just want to, stop everything with the animals and they're just coming to us with all this. Well, no, if you can say, look at what our taxpayer dollars are paying, what about enforcement? A lot of people don't care about the inhumane conditions and the humanity of it, but they do care about dollars. They do care about workers. So you have to figure out what do they care about, and to be able to present that list, as I believe it was Laura and Nicole and Steph that outlined beautifully, that you need a whole arsenal of what the problem is. And that way you can appeal to all these different legislators as well.
Thanks, Judie and Steph. Kind of shifting gears some. So now on the opposite side, away from the crisis language, why do, and I guess this is for Laura, Steph, or Judie, who have worked on many bills, and I know Laura, a lot of your experiences in rodenticides. So why do bills that seem like they should pass, right? That seem so obvious, like they have lots of strong support. Why don't they pass? And also, how can you tell if a legislator is just like, oh, well, this is so sad. This is so sad about these parrots. I support you. And then they don't do anything. So how do you all deal with that? What's your advice?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. One of them is the opposition, and it depends on who their friends are. If it is maybe a union, we tried to do a bill here in the state of California on animal dissection, getting animal dissection out of schools and doing virtual instead of dissecting animals. and the California Teachers Association, CTA, was against it. And so it was a non-starter because CTA was against it. So, it's about opposition. It's about cost. The one place where bills go to die in California is in the Appropriations Committee. And if it has cost over $50,000, it goes to what's called the suspense file. And then you have to make your case for getting out of the suspense file or finding funding or reducing the cost of the bill. The other thing is if it affects an agency, whether it's the California Department of Food and Ag, the California Department of Health, Fish and Wildlife. We've done so many bills on wildlife and have gotten them killed because CDFW put a price tag on it of, $10 million to enforce it. So those are the biggest ones. It's who's the opposition, what does it cost, and does it have an effect on an agency that you're increasing their workload?
I can build on that a little bit. I echo everything that Judie's saying, and I'll be a little bit of a broken record in from my perspective and just say that so much of this is jurisdiction specific, like the teachers union might oppose in California and might be supportive in another state because maybe they don't want this either, right? And it could go either way in some of these cases. And then also how much different stakeholders' opposition, how much their influence and message resonates with legislators can be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some states, the teachers union might be supportive of this. Some states, it wouldn't matter if the teachers union is supportive or opposed, right? It's so jurisdiction specific and like what your legislative body is interested in and influenced by. So being aware of all of that as you explore the sort of background info for where you're looking to work on. And then sometimes why things don't pass is procedural. It might have nothing to do with your issue. It might be like the timing of when it was introduced, what else is pending that session. It might just be some states don't tend to pass bills the first year they're introduced. They sort of like to have more comfort with the language and more sessions of tinkering with it and hearing from stakeholders. Different sessions are different lengths, and so that plays a big role. And then also, has there been something to bring this issue to the forefront of legislators' minds? Whether that's a giant grassroots push, whether that's like this issue being picked up by the media, whatever it is, like has there been something to raise the stakes of this issue in legislators' minds? And there's so many different ways to go about that, and there are things that are more or less persuasive that just will be specific to the particular decision makers on the issue in a given state. And so, that could be the committee that the bill gets referred to, and then down the line, that can be leadership in one or both chambers. So you really need to know your process and your jurisdiction so that you can understand why a bill might be getting held up in the places that it is, if there's really a reason. And sometimes there just isn't, which is a frustrating thing to know. And sometimes it's things that are so behind the scenes, it's very hard to find out what they are. And then speaking to the question of when are legislators being sincere or polite, I think in some states, you can look to what their history is specifically. Like, does anyone in your state sort of track how they've voted, what bills you can look at what bills they've sponsored or co-sponsored in the past to get a sense for, are these issues that they have interest in? And then also, are they interested in it, but is it something that they will also prioritize? So if it's a legislator who maybe really cares about animal issues and co-sponsors every single animal bill, how much would they be pushing any individual animal bill? And, do they already have other animal priorities on their agenda? So you kind of want to look at that context. And also, what is the number of bills that any given legislator files or are filed in any legislative session? Sort of like what does that look like? And in some states, legislators are limited to only filing a certain number of bills in a session. So if they choose to file an issue that is a priority to you, that is really meaningful inherently. So you can look at all those things as well as if there's a connection to the district. If there's a really good connection to their district, they're probably more likely to be genuinely interested in the issue, whether they truly personally care about animals or not. If there's a district connection, that can pique their interest further. And another way to gauge whether they truly are interested, say they're a sponsor of your bill, but you can't tell how much they're really pushing it. You've looked at what their other files look like, and you've kind of gauged that. Well, are they willing to, and have you asked them to take some additional steps through the process? So they've maybe sponsored your bill, but have they, and again, these things will differ from state to state, community to community, but have they circulated a co-sponsorship letter to their colleagues asking them to sign on in support? Have they agreed to testify at a hearing in person or provide written testimony or a letter of support? Have they expressed willingness to write to the committee chair, to write to their leadership and express that this issue is something they really care about? Those are some ways you can kind of gauge their true interest level. And maybe that informs who you decide to ask to be a lead sponsor on a bill in the future, sort of with the asterisk that depending on the state, you can also harm relationships by sort of taking a bill away from a sponsor that has already put in some amount of effort, and you don't want to make any enemies through this process. So there's a lot of considerations, and those are a few of them.
I can talk really briefly about some of the kind of the alteration or juxtaposition between local and state. I mean, one of the reasons I think working on local bills can really help is I think the more local bills you have in a given state, the more likely you are leveraging the likelihood that there will be a bill filed in the state now on this, and then the likelihood that that bill might pass. To talk about rodenticides, just because that was what I've been working on for years. When I first got interested in this issue 10 years ago, it was really hard to get anyone to look at it locally in the state. Here in Massachusetts, you do have an option. Again, it differs from state to state, where you can just file a bill as a citizen. You can get your legislator to do that. So I just asked a couple of organizations, can you help me with some ideas? And I had my representative file a bill. And it wasn't going to really go anywhere, but at least started getting it on, I think, other groups' radars that this is an issue. And then larger groups started looking at it that had a lot more power and reach than I did. And on the local level with rodenticides, again, I had been advocating for years. And then in 2021, we asked for our first bill here in Arlington. It was very conservative, and the select board unanimously rejected it. And then only a few months later, our bald eagle died of rodenticide poisoning in our town, which was our first bald eagle to hatch here in 60 years since DDT had extirpated the species out of the state. So there was a bit of a backlash the select board had, because they had said, oh, well, rodenticide's not a problem in our town. We're not getting wildlife poisonings. Then we lost a bald eagle, which is still state listed in Massachusetts. Everyone loved these bald eagles. They got tourists from around the state and region coming to look at them. So there was a lot of media. So when 8 months later, when we did a much more aggressive thing where we weren't, the first one was just saying, hey, let's use some IPM, some non-poison alternatives at construction sites. Then we were like, we want to ban this. And in Massachusetts, as in most states in the country, you cannot ban pesticide use on private property, including rat poisons. So we banned what we could here. We said, let's ban it on our public properties. And even if our town's not using it much, it sets a precedent. It says this is dangerous and our town is banning it. And then we petitioned the state. Not all states have this option, but towns or cities can petition a state and say, I want to ban it on our private property. Um, and then we lost our other bald eagle a year later, the mother of the first one. And we had a protest here, like 400 people showed up, media came. And now I think we have 90 groups that are working in the state on rodenticide issues. 30 of them have passed public lands bans on rodenticides. Another dozen have also submitted their own petitions to the state saying we want to do rodenticides. And now there is a state bill that wants to ban these rodenticides. And when the second eagle died, one of the legislators who had done a more conservative bill in the state was like, we're a decade away from banning this on the state level. But 10 municipalities later, he changed his mind. So more local bills do make changes on the state level. They are not disparate, like, because that reflects a growing constituency. And I'm seeing that with the pet sale ban too. I don't know exactly how many in Massachusetts. Steph could probably clarify. I think it's 16 to 20 communities have banned dogs, cats, and rabbits. And now there's a state bill. I think the state bill has been around a couple of years, but it's getting more leverage every year. And now there's 5 ones that include birds. And now there is a bill for birds in Massachusetts. And there wouldn't have been, I think, a few years ago when there was no state, like no local bans on birds. But now that there's a handful, there is a state bill. Now, I don't know if it's going to go anywhere because in Massachusetts, we have a very tedious state process. And it's like getting through an eye of a needle to get bills through, despite our very progressive reputation. Most of those progressive milestones, marriage equality or marijuana legalization, those were actually through the courts or ballot votes. It's very hard in Massachusetts to get legislation, but it looks like rodenticide might actually happen because of all this media. And I do think a lot of the pet mills concerns and the pet euthanasia crisis and the pet overpopulation crisis, which has gotten so much worse since COVID and since the housing crisis has gotten so bad, a lot of people understand that for cats and dogs. So I do think the more we can pull other animals into it, like birds, and make people understand that renters have birds too, and renters are being kicked out of homes too, and they can't bring their birds. I think people are seeing that and it's moving up and getting more interest in the state. And I don't know if we have a lot of co-sponsors on the state parrot bill here in Massachusetts, but I will say several of them are from Arlington, and I think that's because we have a ban here. So if they see that their local, so if those House representatives or senators see that their town or city is one of the ones that ban, they will probably co-sponsor that bill because they realize that's their constituency. So I just wanted to offer that.
I'd like to, if we have time, Liz, to echo that what Laura was just saying. I call it, having the political winds in your sail, right? And when something happens locally, and you want to get something done, and Laura, we did get a rodenticide bill passed that I worked on here in Laguna Beach. And it's because of federal law that you can't affect the, private in somebody's backyard, but you can at least get it done on public lands. But Laura Friedman, who is now a congresswoman, did get rodenticides banned, some of them here in California. But when there's something big happens, like the bald eagle dying, like having an oil spill, etc., that is the time, because of the temperature way up and the organic publicity towards it, to move in and get something done immediately. And I just wanted to echo Laura's point on that because it is so important. We got a ban of wild animals and circuses here. And the way we got that done, I was literally reading the news, and it was Hawaii and New Jersey had just gotten it passed, right? 2 states. And I said, that's it. California's got to go next. And I start texting legislators that I know, like, hey, will you do this? Hey, will you do this? And a lot of them said no. And then we got Senator Ben Wazo, who said, yeah, I'll do it, And we had a much bigger bill at the beginning that would have banned roadside zoos, this and that and the other. But at the end of the day, we did get wild animals out of circuses. And without, seeing New Jersey and Hawaii go, that then it made it easy. There was this pathway for us in California. And a lot of times we're the ones cutting the path, but other times others are doing it, and you just gotta, get on it.
Well, thanks everyone. I know, yeah, we're over time now, but Nicole, I just wanted to see if you had any final thoughts or words of encouragement for people, and then we'll close it out.
Just to be persistent. Nothing goes through typically the first year, It's not like a movie, unfortunately, right? You do all this hard work and then it gets pushed through. No, it takes multiple efforts and you have to work with a bunch of different people and have people on your team and have them reach out as well. So keep at it, and then we'll actually affect that change that is so sorely needed. And obviously, there's a ton of parrots to adopt. There really is no need to go and buy a parrot. And that's just something that we really need to drive home. So that's it. That was all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Nicole, and thank you to all our panelists.